My name is Claudia. I am 34 years old, and I have spent the last 11 years drafting wills, settling contested estates, and watching wealthy families tear each other apart over money. I know exactly what greed looks like in a conference room. What I did not know was that I had been sleeping next to it for 6 years. It was a Wednesday in October, week 32 of my pregnancy, and my husband was supposed to be sitting beside me during the ultrasound. Instead, he stepped into the hallway to take a call. I told myself it was fine. His development firm had been stressed lately. I told myself a lot of things that year. I had to use the restroom before the technician came back, so I slipped out quietly, moving slowly the way you do when you are 8 months pregnant and your center of gravity has relocated somewhere around your kneecaps. The hallway was narrow and quiet. Except for my husband, maybe 15 feet away, standing with his back to me, phone pressed tight against his ear. I almost called out to him. Then I heard what he was saying. "She doesn't suspect anything, Mom." His voice was low, but the hallway carried it perfectly. "The doctor says 36 weeks at the latest. That gives Preston enough time to file the paperwork before the grandfather's deadline. The boy goes with them." Claudia gets told there were complications. The baby stopped breathing. They transferred him for emergency care, and by the time she's lucid enough to ask questions, it's done. I stood completely still. He kept talking. "No, I know, but Preston loses the entire estate if he doesn't produce an heir. We're talking $4.5 million, Mom. His grandfather isn't going to hold on much longer, and the trust terms are non-negotiable. Blood heir, male, documented at birth. We deliver what they need, Preston wires the money, and my firm survives. It's already arranged." I pressed my back flat against the wall. My son, my 32-week son, whom I had spent 3 years and 4 rounds of IVF trying to bring into this world. The boy whose name I had not yet told anyone because I wanted to wait until he was in my arms. They had already scheduled him like a FedEx delivery. I went back into the restroom, turned on the cold water, and stood over the sink for a long moment. The terrified woman staring back at me lasted about 30 seconds, then the attorney took over. "Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've ever had to use your own expertise to protect someone you love, hit like and subscribe. This one's for you." I grew up in Baltimore, the daughter of a woman who cleaned other people's offices and a father who drove a delivery truck. They scraped and sacrificed to get me through undergrad and law school, and I have not wasted a single day of that investment. Estate law is dry, detailed, and largely invisible to people who don't have enough money to worry about it. But I know exactly how money moves, how it hides, and how people weaponize it against each other when the stakes are high enough. My husband Miles came from a different world. His mother Dolores was the kind of woman who kept a guest list for her own birthday parties and ranked the guests by net worth. Miles ran a commercial real estate development firm. Boutique projects, high-end residential conversions, the kind of work that looks impressive from the outside and is often held together with credit lines and ego. I knew he was struggling. I didn't know how badly. His sister Maxine had married Preston, a man from a Connecticut family with the kind of generational money that comes with generational conditions. Preston's grandfather had built a pharmaceutical distribution company, sold it for 9 figures in the 90s, and set up a trust with one requirement: a documented male biological heir before the grandfather died or before Preston's 40th birthday, whichever came first. The old man was in hospice. Preston's 40th birthday was 4 months away, and Maxine, after 6 years of marriage, had never been able to conceive. I walked back into the exam room 2 minutes later. Miles came back shortly after that, smiling, kissing my forehead, asking if I was okay. I told him I was tired. I smiled at the ultrasound image on the screen. I let the technician tell us our son looked healthy and strong. I did not cry until I was in the shower that night, alone, with the water running loud enough to cover the sound. Then I got to work. The instinct to grab Miles by the collar and scream the truth into his face was overwhelming. For about 48 hours, I fantasized about it constantly. But evidence gathered in panic is evidence that doesn't hold. I had built enough cases to know that the most dangerous thing I could do was show my hand before I had a full deck. So I kept my face still. I kept asking how the firm was doing. I kept saying I loved him. And when he fell asleep that Friday night, deeply, the way he always slept after a second glass of bourbon, I went to his home office. Miles was not careful with his personal records because he never imagined anyone would look. He kept a secondary set of financial documents in an encrypted folder on his laptop, accessed with a password I had watched him type 11 months earlier and quietly memorized because something in me had already started to pay attention. What I found was worse than I expected. His firm owed $2.8 million to a private lending group, not a bank, not a licensed lender, but the kind of operation that exists in the gray space between legal finance and something much more dangerous. The terms were predatory, compounding monthly interest, personal guarantees attached. Miles had forged my signature on 3 of the documents, pledging assets I had owned before we were married. If the firm defaulted, I was liable. I sat in that dark office for a long time, reading the same paragraphs over and over. Then I found the shell company. It was filed in Delaware 6 weeks earlier, Meridian Health Consulting LLC, registered agent listed as a paralegal from Miles's firm. The LLC had received one incoming wire transfer, $375,000, originating from a trust account connected to Preston's grandfather's estate. The memo line read, "Consulting retainer, pre-delivery services." Pre-delivery. I photographed everything. I copied everything to an encrypted drive I kept locked in my car. I closed the laptop and walked back to bed, and I lay next to my husband and thought very carefully about my next move. The following Tuesday, Dolores called to say she wanted to come stay with us for the final weeks. She framed it as concern. She said I needed rest, that Miles was working too hard to be home enough, that she wanted to be useful. I said I would love the company. Miles looked visibly relieved. She arrived Thursday with 2 large suitcases and immediately began rearranging my kitchen. I watched her the way you watch opposing counsel sort through your documents, noting everything, reacting to nothing. That Sunday, we had dinner at Dolores's house. Maxine and Preston were already there when we arrived. Maxine was polished in the way that women become when they have never had to work. Expensive highlights, a dress that probably cost what my mother made in a month. She hugged me and then held me at length to look at my stomach with an expression I can only describe as inventory. Preston was tall, quietly drunk on whatever he'd been drinking before we arrived, and entirely focused on his phone. He acknowledged me with a nod. He asked Miles how the project timelines were looking. He did not ask how I was feeling. Dinner was prime rib and roasted vegetables served by a catering company Dolores had hired because she liked the performance of having staff. The conversation stayed shallow for most of the meal. Then Preston set down his glass and looked at Miles with the expression of a man who had stopped pretending to be patient. "The attorneys need a status update," he said. "My grandfather's cardiologist doesn't think he'll make it past January. If the documentation isn't filed before he goes, the trust board has 60 days to redirect the entire estate to the foundation." 60 days, Miles. Miles kept his voice even. "I know, we're on track, everything is moving exactly the way we discussed. It needs to move faster." Maxine reached over and put her hand on Preston's arm. She looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're just so grateful," she said softly, "for everything." I picked up my water glass. "I can't wait to finally have him home," I said. The word home settled into a brief fractured silence. Preston's jaw tightened. Miles took a long sip of wine. I smiled pleasantly at all of them and asked Dolores if there was dessert. That night I called my older sister. She lives in Atlanta and is the only person in my life who has known every secret I have ever kept. I told her everything. Her response, after a long silence, was, "Tell me what you need me to do." "I need you to be reachable," I said, "and I need you to have a copy of everything." I emailed her the encrypted files that night. The next morning, Dolores set a small orange prescription bottle next to my orange juice. No pharmacy label, no dosage instructions, just my initial written on masking tape in black marker. "Miles picked these up from Dr. Harlan," she said, already moving back toward the stove. "Your iron levels are low. 1 every morning with food." Dr. Harlan was the OB Miles had insisted we switch to at week 20. I had liked my original doctor. Miles said Dr. Harlan came highly recommended and could accommodate a private birth suite at his affiliated clinic. I had not pushed back hard enough. I looked at the pill, large, chalky, a slightly different shape than any prenatal vitamin I had ever taken. Dolores turned from the stove and watched me with the patience of someone who expected to see me swallow it. I smiled, brought the pill to my lips, and in the half-second when she reached to adjust the burner, I slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan and replaced it with a white breath mint from the same pocket. I drank the full glass of juice in one long swallow. "Thank you," I said. "I've been so exhausted lately." That's normal, she said. You need to rest more. That night, after she was asleep, I drove to a 24-hour pharmacy across town and bought a basic reagent testing kit. The result came back within 10 minutes. The pill contained a concentrated synthetic prostaglandin, the same class of compound used to induce cervical ripening and trigger early labor. She was trying to force me into labor on their timeline. Rush me to Dr. Harlan's clinic in a manufactured emergency, sedate me before I could object, and leave me to wake up to the news that my son had not survived. I sat in my car in that parking lot for a while. Then I drove home, went to the pantry where Dolores kept the orange bottle on the highest shelf, and replaced every pill in it with generic calcium carbonate tablets, same size, same chalky color. I kept the original sealed in an evidence bag in my car. I dropped one with a toxicologist colleague the next morning and requested written analysis. I also made a phone call. His name is Bo, a former FBI financial crimes investigator who now consults on estate litigation cases. We had worked 3 cases together. He is methodical, discreet, and very expensive. I called him on a Friday afternoon and told him I needed surveillance on 2 individuals and documentation of financial transactions through a Delaware LLC. I told him the people involved were desperate and well-funded. How serious is this? He asked. Federal, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Send me the file names, I'll have eyes on them by Monday. The baby shower was held the following Saturday in the private dining room of Dolores's country club. Pale gold decor, a towering cake, a string quartet for the first hour. My coworkers came, some neighbors, a few friends from law school, and of course the family. I wore a cream dress. Taped to my sternum under the fabric was a recording device Bo had delivered 2 days earlier, no larger than a button, transmitting to a secure cloud server. I sat in the velvet chair they had arranged for me, opened gifts, smiled at everyone. But I kept watching Preston. He had started drinking early. By the time guests clustered in small groups with champagne, he was on his 5th scotch and no longer moderating his volume. He crossed the room toward me when Dolores and Miles were both occupied on the far side of the space. He stopped in front of my chair, swaying slightly. You look good, he said. Not a compliment, an assessment. Thank you, Preston. He leaned down, conspiratorial, the way drunk men do when they think they're being subtle. You know what's riding on this. I want you to know the family appreciates it. I'm just focused on staying healthy. He put his hand on my stomach, uninvited, heavy, entitled, and said, close enough that the recording device caught every syllable. That boy is my family's future, my grandfather's entire legacy. You make sure he comes out perfect. I've paid for perfect. I looked at his hand on my stomach and thought very calmly, I have you. Miles appeared from nowhere, grabbed Preston's arm with a grip that whitened his knuckles, and steered him toward the terrace doors. Maxine materialized at my elbow with an apology that was really a warning, dressed in a concerned voice. He's just been under so much pressure, she murmured. I understand completely, I said. Family situations are complicated. She searched my face. I gave her nothing. 3 days later, Miles came home with a manila envelope. Intake paperwork for the private suite at Dr. Harlan's clinic, he said. Standard pre-registration. He handed me a pen and said it needed to go back by noon. Just sign the flagged pages, it was routine, he was going to be late. I told him I couldn't sign anything without reading it first. Occupational habit. He watched intake through page 12. Epidural consent on 13. Liability waivers on 14 through 15. Then page 16, a clause titled Neonatal Emergency Protocol, Supplement B. I translated the language in under 30 seconds. In the event of neonatal distress resulting in transfer or loss, the signatory waives the right to independent post-transfer review and consents to facility-directed disposition of neonatal remains. Facility-directed disposition. And on page 17, buried under a paragraph about maternal blood pressure monitoring, a designation listing Maxine as temporary medical power of attorney in the event of maternal incapacitation. If I signed these papers, they had legal cover for everything. If I then broke down in grief, Maxine would have the right to make decisions about my surviving care and my surviving child. I looked up at Miles. He was checking his watch. I'm going to need to read this more carefully, I said. Can Dr. Harlan email me a copy? I'd like to review it tonight. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He needs originals, just sign the highlighted sections. Miles, I kept my voice level. You know I don't sign documents I haven't fully read, it's just how I'm built. He took a breath, said he'd asked the clinic for an extension, left with the envelope. I went to my car and called Beau, told him the timeline was accelerating. That Sunday evening, I tested my husband's limits. My sister had driven up from Atlanta that morning. I'd told Miles she wanted to see the nursery. What I didn't tell him was that she was staying in a hotel 3 blocks away, and that, if things went badly, she would call Beau's federal contact on my behalf. Miles and I were alone in the living room. Dolores had gone to bed early. I took a breath, shifted on the couch, and let out a sharp cry. He was on his feet instantly. For a fraction of a second, his face showed something that looked like genuine concern. Then it disappeared. The softness fell away and something cold and calculating moved in behind his eyes. "What's happening?" he said. "Not are you okay, what's happening?" "Something's wrong," I gasped, curling forward. "I need an ambulance, call 911. "No," he said it fast, hard, like a reflex. "We're not calling 911. Miles, I need a real hospital. You're going to Dr. Harlan's clinic." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling his emergency line right now." He grabbed my arm, not gently. His fingers closed around my wrist with enough force that I felt the pressure through the bone. He dragged me toward the stairs and I let him, stumbling, crying, while my phone recorded every word from my robe pocket. He locked the bedroom door from the outside with the deadbolt key. I heard him in the hallway, voice low and urgent, telling someone to send the transport van to the back of the house, telling them I couldn't be allowed to reach anyone, telling them the timeline was tonight. My husband had just locked his pregnant wife in a room to prevent her from calling an ambulance. I sat on the edge of the bed and sent one text to Beau's federal contact, "Moving now, Harlan Clinic, spring it." Then I deleted the message, put my phone away, and waited. The van arrived in 20 minutes, 2 men in scrubs who didn't introduce themselves. Miles sat across from me in the back, watching his GPS, tapping his foot. He didn't look at me once. The clinic occupied a converted medical building near the edge of town. The rear entrance opened into a private corridor that smelled of bleach and recirculated air. They transferred me to a gurney and wheeled me fast through hallways with no patient names on the doors. Dolores was waiting in the reception area alongside Maxine, who was clutching a pale blue receiving blanket against her chest like a woman who had already decided it was hers. Preston stood near the wall with his hands in his pockets, looking at his watch. They wheeled me past all of them. Maxine said something soft and false about how I was in good hands. I didn't respond. Dr. Harlan was already in the delivery suite, gloved and masked, moving with the efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this. He told me my blood pressure was too high, that he was administering a sedative for my comfort, that it was routine. He picked up a syringe that was not routine. Too large, the fluid too dense. Miles pinned my arm to the bedrail. Dr. Harlan stepped forward. I waited until the needle was inches from my skin. Then I twisted, wrenched my arm free, and drove my palm hard into Dr. Harlan's wrist. The syringe flew sideways, hit the tile floor, and shattered. Miles lunged for my legs. I kicked, screamed, fought with everything left in me, and then the doors came off the hinges. Federal agents moved through the room so fast it looked choreographed. 12 agents, rifles raised, voices filling the space with commands that left no room for argument. The agent leading them, a woman named Walsh who Beau had briefed personally, walked in behind them with a badge and the calm of someone who had already won. "Step back from the patient," Walsh said, "hands where I can see them, both of you." Miles stood very still, then he raised his hands. Dr. Harlan pressed himself against the supply counter. He was shaking. Through the open doorway I could see the hallway outside. Dolores was against the wall, a female officer reading her Miranda rights while she screamed that this was a mistake, that her son was a successful businessman, that I was a paranoid liar. Maxine had dropped the blanket. She was on the clinic floor with her arms around herself, crying in a way that was not performance. It was the sound of a woman finally understanding that this was over. Preston was handcuffed against the reception desk, already demanding his attorneys. I pushed myself upright on the gurney. My hands were shaking, my voice was not. Agent Walsh looked at me. "You okay?" "I will be," I said. As the agents walked Miles out in cuffs, he looked back at me over his shoulder. Whatever he expected to see on my face, grief, collapse, something. I don't know. What I gave him was nothing. I had already moved past him. In the corridor, within clear earshot of Preston, I said, I submitted the audio of your country club conversation to the Sterling Family Trust Board of Directors this afternoon. Their attorneys contacted the trust administrator. You were formally removed as a beneficiary at 4 o'clock today. Preston went very quiet. The 4.5 million is gone, I said. And your grandfather's attorneys have already been notified of the wire fraud investigation. I'd save your phone calls for a public defender. 3 months later, I am sitting in the morning light of the apartment I bought myself. A 2-bedroom near a good park in a neighborhood where my son can grow up, nothing extravagant, everything exactly chosen. He is asleep in the other room. I named him after my father, and every time I say his name out loud, I feel something settle in my chest. Miles is awaiting federal trial on wire fraud, conspiracy, and criminal false imprisonment charges. His firm was liquidated months ago. The private lenders he borrowed from have since been referred to additional federal investigators. It turned out they were connected to a broader financial crimes network, and Miles was far from their only desperate client. Dr. Harlan's medical license was suspended within 48 hours of his arrest. The state licensing board found 2 prior complaints against him, both involving patients who reported their birth records had been altered. Both cases had been closed quietly through settlement. He will not practice medicine again. Preston is facing federal RICO charges. Without his grandfather's trust and with his family publicly distancing themselves from the scandal, he has retained a single overworked attorney and no real options. Maxine accepted a reduced conspiracy charge in exchange for testimony. She is serving 3 years. It is not enough, but it is documented. Dolores is awaiting sentencing. The toxicology report on the pills came back exactly as I had documented, and the chain of evidence was clean. Her attorney is arguing diminished capacity. It is not going well for him. I sat in the nursery this morning while my son slept, and I thought about the version of this story where I signed those papers, where I trusted the people who were supposed to protect me, where I woke up in that clinic grieving a child who was alive and being driven across state lines. I think about it sometimes. Then I look at him and I stop. The hardest part of surviving something like this is not the anger. The anger was easy. The hardest part is the recalibration. Learning to trust the quiet voice that told you something was wrong before you had a single piece of evidence. That voice was right. I just had to be still enough to listen to it. If you have ever had to fight for something that should have been safe, your child, your dignity, your future, drop your city in the comments and let me know you're out there. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with anyone who needs a reminder that you don't have to be the loudest one in the room to win. Sometimes the quietest one is the most dangerous.